Good morning. Hello, everyone. It is so exciting for me to be, speaking to you virtually on this very, very important topic of the session today, Africa's place in the global financial architecture. And I want you to ask yourself a question. Why is this topic important? Why do we need to have a session on understanding Africa's position in the global financial architecture? Right? There must be a reason to it. Now, there's an African proverb that says, until the lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. So you may ask, why am I giving you this proverb? What is its relevance, right? Every study that we have today that discusses financial power, fiscal policy, monetary policy, it comes from specific disciplines, from specific jurisdictions and geographical locations, because these areas believe that they have the intellect to be able to guide nations on how to structure their economies and how to also design and formulate their monetary and fiscal policies. In other words, they are the ones dictating to other countries what their position should be when it comes to the global financial system, right? And the roles that they're supposed to be playing within the global financial architecture, if I may use that word. And the question is, who gave those jurisdictions, those geographical locations, such power, right? And my answer is, go back to history. Colonization and the rise of capitalism, which has led to the centering of finance in the global north. So when it comes to Africa's place in the global financial system, does it have the power, the privilege, the tools, the resources that are necessary to shape global norms in redesigning and defining what the monetary and fiscal policy of the world should be, or how global markets should be accessed? Or is Africa's position such that it's only reactionary? You're told what to do. You're told this is how you're going to price your goods. This is how you're going to deal with inflation. This is how you're going to value your currency against the hegemonic currencies of the world. Does Africa decide this, or is it decided for Africa? And to begin with, I want us to start off by some questions. Think about answers to these questions that I'm posing to you. My first question is that if you were to draw a timeline of the world's financial centers over the last 500 years, which cities or regions would feature prominently and why? My other question to you is, why do you think some of the world's most resource-rich regions, like Africa, do not align with the most economically dominant regions on the global stage? My final question to you is, if African nations hold such a vast reservoir of resources like oil, gold, and diamonds, why isn't an African currency as dominant as the euro or the dollar? And my answers lie in what is displayed on my slide here, because of colonization, capitalism, which has resulted in dependent economies. Now, from the 15th century onwards, European powers expanded their empires through colonization, particularly in Africa, also the Americas, and in parts of Asia. And this led to a massive influx of resources, labor, and wealth into Europe. Now, the exploitation and trade of these resources that were moving into Europe out of Africa, it coincided with the European Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, which then fueled the growth of capitalism. As capitalism flourished, Europe saw the rise of financial institutions, banks, and stock exchange markets, right? It became the hub of these rising financial entities. So colonized regions like Africa were integrated into the world system as raw material suppliers, making them dependent on European markets. Now, these regions, our region, the continent, they were discouraged from industrializing. making them perpetually subservient to European industrial might. Then there was the other problem that you have to deal with, the racial superiority narrative, right? Which there's a book by Professor Lumba on monetary authorities, whereby he says that the European powers felt that non-European people did not have that level of intelligence, right, or knowledge to be responsible for white capital. So in other words, money is white, right? Apparently so, right? So money has to be controlled by the European powers. It cannot be controlled by non-European powers. Therefore, when you think about it in that sense, Africa's position in the global financial architecture is basically reactionary. It's not to be participatory or proactive in shaping global discourse around money matters or financial matters. Now, European colonial powers, they often perpetuated narratives of racial superiority, the belief that non-Europeans were inherently incapable of governing themselves, let alone managing global finance, right? And that was also used to justify colonial rule. It's also used to justify how decisions come from particular jurisdictions on how African central banks should even function. Now, this racist ideology extended to the management of capital. By controlling finance and capital flows, European powers could further dominate colonized territories. It wasn't just about economic benefit. It was about maintaining a hierarchical power dynamic where Europeans were always at the top. What keeps you at the top is having that financial power. So global financial architecture is established in a way to keep the Europeans always at the top. Now, the major financial hubs started emerging in European cities, London, Paris, Frankfurt, and later New York. And New York also has European roots. The establishment of these hubs in the West was no accident. It was both a consequence of economic growth and a tool to ensure control over global financial systems. And this centralization was justified by the racist belief that only Europeans could effectively manage and steward global financial systems. So colonization and capitalism then began to have a symbiotic sort of a relationship. The racial prejudices of the time fueled colonization, and colonization in turn expanded capitalist enterprises. These capitalist endeavors then reinforced European prejudices in a feedback loop where control of capital became both a means and an end. So colonized territories and their inhabitants were seen as mere instruments to this end. Right? So by understanding the intersections of racism, colonialism, and capitalism, we can better grasp the foundations of today's global financial system and the challenges faced by nations trying to navigate and reposition within it. Okay, and as a result of that, what we're saying is that if we're going to think about Africa's position in the global financial architecture or the global financial system that is there, it doesn't have monetary control. It doesn't have regulatory powers or any sort of control. And it doesn't even have the ability to strengthen its own currencies. Yes, because the monetary control lies with modern banking. And modern banking has come from European powers, right? So European powers not only controlled resource trade, but also the very money that is used for this trade. They established the gold standard, which put European currencies at the center of global finance. Now think about Africa and how much gold is there on the continent. And if we have the gold standard that has been established with which to price currency or value currency, why are African currencies so weak? Okay, then we talk about regulation and control. So European powers, given their vast resources and economic influence, they created rules and regulations that other nations had to adhere to. Central banks outside Europe often had to align with European monetary policy to ensure stability and trust in their own currencies. And due to this centralization, even post the gold standard era, yes, major global transactions like oil trade were and are still predominantly conducted in European currencies, primarily the dollar, the British pound, and the euro, ensuring their continued strength. So, what then is Africa's role in the global financial system? By now, you should be able to answer this for me. So, there is economic dependency. African nations, post-independence, they found themselves in economies built to serve European interests. Their economies were, and in many instances remain, export-oriented, focused on raw materials. Africa's place in the global financial architecture is as a recipient, not as a contributor. So African nations became recipients of international financial policies rather than contributors to them. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank often impose conditions that dictate how African countries manage their economies. And then we have this entire debt cycle. So many African nations are caught in a debt trap where they are borrowing money to pay off older debts, leading to economic policies that prioritize debt repayment over local development. And this is basically what the global financial system in place is propagating, right? So now we move on to this argument about Africa's resource paradox. Despite being a continent rich in valuable resources like uranium, oil, gas, gold, and diamonds, Africa hasn't taken a central financial position. Why is this? Historical exploitation. Historically, the benefits of these resources have always flowed out of Africa, not staying within. So financial power has never been retained on the continent. Then there's this issue of the lack of industrialization. Without extensive industrial infrastructure, African nations often end up just exporting raw materials rather than finished goods. And that basically results in very little profit. If there is no profit, and there are no savings on the continent, it loses its power to be able to be a financial giant. So its place within the global financial architecture is then weakened. But there must be some solutions, right? And what are these solutions? So one of the solutions is regional integration. African nations can come together to form economic blocs, similar to the European Union, and this would give them better bargaining power in the global trade and finance. We're already seeing this in the form of Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Yes, so that's a step in the right direction. Another sort of a political solution would be localize financial systems. Instead of relying heavily on Western financial models, African nations can develop their own models and cater to their unique needs and challenges. And these discussions are beginning to take place. You're going to hear presidents like the president of Kenya, the president of Rwanda, already saying that we need to move away from the dollar. We need to be able to trade in our local currencies, right? There are discussions about thinking in terms of a uniform, harmonized African coin. The other political solution would be resource management. You know, there's a need to implement policies that ensure resources are processed locally before export. This can increase the value of exports and create local jobs. Again, this is beginning to happen. I think it was either in Zimbabwe or Nigeria. I can't remember which country. But they gave an ultimatum to Canada and other European countries to say that we will no longer export lithium to your countries. Come and set up an industry locally here, manufacture the lithium here, make the batteries here, and then export them, right? A clever decision. We also need to think of a political solution in terms of negotiating debt. We cannot take our rightful place as strong financial powers within the global financial system if we're going to be dogged with this problem of debt. So there's a need to lobby for debt relief or better terms from international lenders. This can then free up funds for local development. And most importantly, there's the need to educate and innovate. So we've got to invest in education and encourage innovation in finance and technology. This in itself can foster the creation of African financial institutions and fintech startups that can challenge the global norms, and it can put Africa in the position that it needs to be in the global financial system as the rule maker, not the rule taker. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will end my presentation, and I really look forward to your discussions on the same. Thank you very much.